The hot sun shone down on the dry land. A weak Mustang stood alone, its body thin and tired. Its ribs showed, and its coat was dirty and rough. The horse had no energy left. It had been walking for days without food or water. Its legs shook as it tried to move, but they were too weak. With a soft groan, the horse fell to the ground. Its breathing was slow, and its eyes were dull. It had been left to die, alone in the middle of nowhere. Far away in a small town, Dr. Emily Davis sat in her clinic, scrolling through her phone. She was a kind veterinarian who loved animals. Suddenly, she stopped. A picture of the sick Mustang appeared on her screen. Someone had posted it, hoping for help. Emily's heart ached. She knew she had to do something. Without wasting a second, she grabbed her bag and ran to her truck. She called her assistant, Mark. "Get the emergency kit ready," she said. "We need water, food, and medicine." Mark's voice was worried. "Do you think it will survive?" Emily gripped the wheel as she drove. "I do not know," she said, "but I have to try." Emily drove as fast as she could. The road was rough, covered in dust and rocks. She checked the map. The Mustang was far away, in the middle of nowhere. If she did not reach it in time, it would be too late. Mark called her again. "I have everything ready," he said. "How long until you get there?" Emily glanced at the clock. "Maybe an hour," she said. "I just hope it is still alive." The sun was starting to set when she finally reached the location. She parked her truck and grabbed her supplies. The land was empty and silent. Then she saw it. The Mustang lay on its side, barely moving. Emily rushed to its side. "Hey there," she whispered. "You are not alone anymore." She poured water into a small bowl and gently lifted the horse's head. Its dry tongue slowly licked at the water. Mark arrived a few minutes later with a stretcher. "We need to get it to the clinic," he said. With great care, they lifted the Mustang onto the stretcher. It let out a weak sigh but did not fight. It was too tired. Emily touched its mane. "Hold on," she said. "We are taking you home." The clinic was quiet when Emily and Mark arrived. The Mustang lay still in the truck, its breathing slow. The team rushed outside to help. "Get 4 fluids," Emily said, "and bring blankets." They gently placed the Mustang on a bed of soft hay inside the barn. It flinched at their touch, its body stiff with fear. Emily knelt beside it. "You are safe now," she whispered. "No one will hurt you." The team worked quickly. They cleaned its wounds, checked its heartbeat, and gave it medicine. Mark stood nearby, watching. "It looks so weak," he said. Emily nodded. "It has been through a lot, but it is still here. That means it is a fighter." The Mustang's eyes fluttered open for a moment. It did not move, but it was awake. Mark sighed. "Do you think it understands we are trying to help?" Emily stroked its neck gently. "I hope so." Outside, the moon rose in the sky. The night was quiet, but inside the barn, a battle for life had begun. Scene 5, naming Phoenix. The Mustang had no name. It had been left behind, forgotten. But Emily believed every life mattered. "We need to name it," she said to Mark. Mark thought for a moment. "How about Phoenix?" he suggested. "Like the bird that rises from the ashes." Emily smiled. "Phoenix. That is perfect." The Mustang's ears twitched slightly. It was as if it had heard its new name. Emily's heart filled with hope. The next few days were critical. Phoenix was too weak to stand. The team took turns feeding it small amounts of food and water. Some days, it refused to eat. Emily sat beside Phoenix every night, talking softly. "You are not alone anymore," she said. "You are going to get better." One evening, she noticed something different. Phoenix lifted its head slightly, looking at her. It was a small movement, but it meant everything. Emily touched its forehead gently. "You are stronger than you think," she whispered. The road to recovery was long, but for the first time, there was hope. Each day, Phoenix grew a little stronger. Its breathing improved, and its eyes looked more alert. It still could not stand, but Emily knew healing took time. One morning, she walked into the barn and found Phoenix shifting its legs. It was trying to move. Mark hurried inside. "Is it happening?" he asked. Emily watched closely. "I think so." Phoenix struggled, its muscles weak from weeks of starvation. It pushed against the ground, trying to lift itself, but its strength was not enough yet. It collapsed back onto the hay. Emily knelt beside it. "Do not give up," she said softly. Phoenix let out a deep breath. It was tired, but there was determination in its eyes. Later that evening, Phoenix tried again. This time, it lasted a little longer before falling back down. Mark sighed. "It is not ready yet." Emily smiled. "No, but it is trying. That is what matters." Phoenix blinked slowly, as if understanding. For the first time, Emily truly believed that Phoenix was not just surviving. It was healing. The days passed slowly, but Phoenix kept fighting. It ate small meals and drank more water. The medicine was working, and the wounds on its body were healing. One morning, Emily walked into the barn and saw something different. Phoenix was not lying down. It was trying to stand. Its legs trembled as it pushed against the soft hay. Emily's heart pounded. "Come on, Phoenix," she whispered. Mark rushed in and saw it too. "Is it really trying?" he asked in disbelief. Phoenix struggled, its body shaking under its own weight. Its front legs lifted first, then its back legs. It wobbled, then collapsed again. Emily knelt beside it. "You are doing great," she said gently. "Try again when you are ready." Phoenix took a deep breath, its nostrils flaring. It did not try again right away, but there was something new in its eyes, a quiet determination. Mark smiled. "It is not giving up." Emily stroked Phoenix's mane. "No," she said, "and neither are we." The journey was far from over, but this was proof that Phoenix was not just surviving. It was fighting to live. The next day, Emily entered the barn early. She found Phoenix already shifting its legs, preparing to stand again. She knelt beside it. "You are eager today." Phoenix's muscles tensed as it lifted its front legs. Its back legs shook, but it did not stop. Slowly, carefully, it pushed itself up. Emily held her breath. Mark stood frozen in place, watching. Phoenix stood for a few seconds, wobbling slightly. Then, its legs gave out and it collapsed back onto the hay. Emily quickly ran to its side. "That was amazing," she said softly. "You did it." Phoenix let out a soft snort, as if understanding her words. Mark exhaled. "That was the longest it has stood." Emily nodded. "Yes, and next time, it will last even longer." That night, Emily sat beside Phoenix, gently running her fingers through its mane. "You are going to make it," she whispered. For the first time since she found it, she truly believed those words. The barn was quiet in the early morning. Emily walked in with fresh water and hay. She stopped in her tracks when she saw Phoenix. It was standing. Not just standing. It was taking small, shaky steps. Mark ran in behind her. "No way," he breathed. Phoenix's legs wobbled as it moved forward. Step by step, it walked toward Emily, stopping just a few feet away. Its breathing was heavy, but its eyes were bright. Emily's heart swelled with emotion. "Phoenix," she whispered. Phoenix stretched its nose toward her. Emily reached out a hand, and for the first time, the Mustang let her touch its face. Mark shook his head in amazement. "I never thought I would see this." Emily smiled, tears in her eyes. This is only the beginning. Phoenix had fought to live. Now, it was learning to live again. Phoenix could walk now, but it was still afraid. When anyone other than Emily came close, it flinched. Its past had left deep scars. Emily knew trust took time. Every day, she spent hours with Phoenix. She spoke in a soft voice, letting it get used to her presence. One afternoon, she held out a carrot. "You do not have to take it," she said gently. "Just know that I am here." Phoenix sniffed the carrot, but did not eat it. Emily did not force it. Instead, she set the carrot down and stepped back. The next day, she tried again. This time, Phoenix stretched its neck and took a small bite. Emily smiled. "Good job," she whispered. Mark watched from the fence. "It is starting to trust you." Emily nodded. "One step at a time." That night, Phoenix did something unexpected. As Emily sat beside it, it rested its head against her shoulder. She froze, then smiled. "You are safe now," she whispered. And for the first time, Phoenix seemed to believe it. Weeks passed, and Phoenix grew stronger. Its coat became shinier, and its steps became steadier. The day finally came for the biggest test yet. "We need to let Phoenix outside," Emily said. Mark hesitated. "Do you think it is ready?" Emily looked at Phoenix. Only one way to find out. They opened the barn doors, and fresh air filled the space. Phoenix sniffed the wind but did not move. Emily stepped outside first. "Come on," she said softly. "The world is waiting." Phoenix took a careful step forward, then another. For the first time in months, it felt the earth beneath its hooves. It lifted its head, ears twitching at the sounds of nature. Then, as if remembering what it once was, Phoenix began to run. Mark laughed. "Look at it go." Emily wiped away a tear. "That is what freedom looks like." Phoenix raced across the field, strong and free. The Mustang that had once been left to die had found life again. And this time, nothing could stop it. Phoenix ran across the field, its muscles moving with strength and purpose. Emily and Mark watched in awe. It was hard to believe this was the same horse that had once been too weak to stand. After a few minutes, Phoenix slowed down and turned back toward Emily. It trotted up to her and gently nudged her arm. Emily smiled. "You did it," she whispered. "You are truly free." Mark crossed his arms. "So, what happens now?" Emily looked at Phoenix. "Now, we let it heal completely. But one day, it will have to decide, stay here or return to the wild." Mark sighed. "That is going to be a tough choice." Emily nodded. "Yes, but Phoenix has earned the right to choose." That night, Emily sat outside, watching the stars. Phoenix stood nearby, grazing peacefully. This was not just a rescue anymore. This was a second chance at life. Emily thought about all the moments they had shared, the long nights, the small victories, the quiet trust that had grown between them. She knew Phoenix still carried scars from its past, but it had also learned to trust again, to hope again. She glanced over at Phoenix, who was now contentedly chewing on some grass. There was a calmness in its eyes that hadn't been there before. It was no longer the broken, forgotten horse she had found in the desert. Now, it was a symbol of resilience, of perseverance, of the power of healing. As the cool night breeze brushed against her face, Emily realized something important. Phoenix's journey wasn't just about survival. It was about finding its place in the world again. Whether it chose to stay with her or return to the wild, Phoenix would always carry the lessons it had learned during its time at the clinic. It would always remember the kindness and compassion that had saved its life. Emily stood up and walked over to Phoenix. She placed a hand on its neck, feeling the warmth of its body beneath her touch. Phoenix nuzzled her gently, as if sensing her thoughts. "You've come so far," she whispered, "and no matter where you go from here, I'll always be proud of you." Phoenix blinked slowly, its eyes reflecting the moonlight. For the first time, Emily felt a deep sense of peace. She knew that whatever decision Phoenix made, it would be the right one. Because Phoenix had fought for its life, and now it deserved the freedom to live it on its own terms. Days turned into weeks, and Phoenix continued to grow stronger. It trusted Emily completely, but was still wary of strangers. One afternoon, a man arrived at the clinic. He was tall, with rough hands and a hard stare. "I heard you found a Mustang," he said. Emily's stomach tightened. "Why do you ask?" The man shrugged. "Might be one of mine. I used to have a few wild ones." Emily's heart pounded. Was this the person who had abandoned Phoenix? She stayed calm. This horse was found in terrible shape. No food, no water. Left to die? The man smirked. That is how nature works. Anger burned inside Emily. No, she said firmly. That is how cruelty works. Phoenix stood behind her, ears pinned back. It recognized the man. Its body tensed, and its nostrils flared. Emily placed a hand on its neck. You are safe, she whispered. The man sighed. Well, if it is yours now, I will leave it to you. Then, without another word, he walked away. Emily watched until he was gone. Then she turned to Phoenix. He will never hurt you again, she promised, and Phoenix, as if understanding, pressed its head gently against her shoulder. Even after the stranger left, Phoenix remained uneasy. It watched the clinic carefully, as if expecting someone else to appear. Emily knew the scars of the past took time to heal. She spent more hours with Phoenix, talking softly and letting it know it was safe. One day, she brought a young girl named Lily to meet Phoenix. Lily loved animals, but had always been afraid of horses. Do not worry, Emily said. Phoenix knows what it is like to be afraid. Lily hesitated, then reached out a small hand. Phoenix sniffed her fingers and stood still. Slowly, Lily touched its nose. A wide smile spread across her face. It is so soft. Emily nodded. And kind, just like you. For the first time, Phoenix let someone other than Emily touch it without flinching. Mark grinned. Looks like it is not just Phoenix who is learning to trust again. Emily smiled. No, it is not. Healing took time. But Phoenix was proving that even the deepest wounds could mend. After Lily's visit, something changed in Phoenix. It no longer flinched when strangers approached. It still watched them carefully, but the fear in its eyes was fading. Emily noticed how it had started seeking her out more often. Whenever she walked outside, Phoenix would follow, staying close but never demanding attention. One evening, as Emily sat on the grass watching the sunset, Phoenix walked over and lay down beside her. Mark stepped out of the barn and chuckled. I think you have a shadow now. Emily smiled, running her fingers through Phoenix's mane. It trusts me? Mark nodded. That is not something to take lightly. Emily leaned against Phoenix, feeling the warmth of its body. I do not take it lightly at all. Phoenix closed its eyes, completely at peace. The wild Mustang that had once been abandoned was no longer just a rescue. It had chosen Emily as its family, and Emily knew, no matter what the future held, they would face it together. Phoenix was stronger now, its muscles firm and its coat shining. But Emily had never tried to ride it. One afternoon, Mark leaned against the fence and asked, Do you think it will let you? Emily hesitated. Only if Phoenix is ready. She walked toward the Mustang with a rope in her hands. Phoenix, we are going to try something new today. She gently placed a rope around its neck. Phoenix stood still, watching her. Slowly, she led it around the field, letting it get used to the feeling. After a few days, Emily placed a light blanket on its back. Phoenix twitched but did not move away. Mark grinned. I think it trusts you enough. Emily took a deep breath and placed her hands on Phoenix's back. Are you ready? She whispered. She carefully climbed onto its back, her heart pounding. Phoenix stood still, then took a small step forward. Emily smiled. Good boy. For the first time, Phoenix was carrying a rider. Not because it had to, but because it wanted to. Riding Phoenix was a dream Emily never thought would come true. But now, as they moved together across the field, she felt an unbreakable bond. She kept her hands light on the rope, letting Phoenix set the pace. It walked, then trotted, and finally broke into a smooth canter. Mark watched from the fence, shaking his head in amazement. Look at them, he murmured. Emily laughed as the wind rushed past her face. You are incredible, Phoenix. Phoenix's hooves thundered against the earth. It was not just running, it was flying. When they finally slowed to a stop, Emily leaned forward and hugged its neck. Thank you for trusting me. Phoenix snorted softly, as if saying, I trust you with everything. Mark walked up, shaking his head. You have yourself a partner for life. Emily smiled. Yes, I do. And in that moment, she knew Phoenix was not just a horse. He was a survivor, a friend, and a symbol of hope. Months passed, and Phoenix had become part of Emily's life. But deep down, she knew the question still remained. Was Phoenix meant to stay or return to the wild? One evening, she sat by the fence, watching Phoenix graze. Mark sat beside her. You have been thinking about something, he said. Emily sighed. Phoenix was born wild. What if keeping him here is not the right thing? Mark was quiet for a moment. Do you think he would leave? Emily looked at Phoenix. I do not know. She made a decision. Tomorrow, we take him to the open fields. We see what he chooses. Mark nodded. Whatever happens, he knows he is loved. Emily swallowed the lump in her throat. That is what matters. The thought of saying goodbye hurt, but she knew Phoenix's choice had to be his own. The next morning, Emily led Phoenix to the far end of the ranch, where the land stretched for miles. Beyond the wooden fence was the open wilderness, the place where Phoenix had once belonged. Mark walked beside her. Are you ready for this? Emily took a deep breath. I have to be. She unlatched the gate and stepped back. The wind carried the scent of freedom, and Phoenix lifted its head, ears twitching. For a long moment, it stood still, looking at the open land. Emily's heart pounded. Would it leave? Phoenix took a step forward, then another. Emily held her breath as it walked past the gate. It paused, looking at the distant hills. Then, Phoenix turned back. It trotted up to Emily, pressing its head against her shoulder. Tears welled in her eyes. You are staying? She whispered. Mark smiled. Looks like he made his choice. Emily wrapped her arms around Phoenix's neck. Welcome home, she whispered. Phoenix was free, but it had chosen to stay. With Phoenix now a permanent part of the ranch, Emily began training him gently, not to break his spirit, but to help him grow even stronger. She introduced him to more people, allowing him to interact with others. Lily visited often, bringing apples and brushing his mane. He is like a protector, she said one day, giggling as Phoenix nuzzled her. Mark chuckled. More like a guardian. Emily smiled. Maybe that is his purpose now, to help others heal, just like he did. One day, a young boy who had been afraid of horses visited. Emily let him watch as she worked with Phoenix. Slowly, the boy reached out and touched Phoenix's nose. Phoenix stood perfectly still, as if he understood. The boy smiled for the first time in weeks. Emily knew then Phoenix was not just a survivor. He was a healer, and his journey was far from over. One night, dark clouds rolled in. Thunder rumbled, shaking the earth. Emily rushed to the barn, making sure all the animals were safe. She found Phoenix standing in his stall, ears pinned back. Do not worry, she whispered, stroking his neck. But the storm was stronger than she expected. The wind howled and rain poured heavily. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed in the night. A tree had fallen near the barn, breaking part of the fence. Mark ran in. The fence is down. The horses could get out. Emily's heart pounded. We have to check. She grabbed a flashlight and ran outside. The rain soaked her clothes, but she kept going. She had to make sure Phoenix was safe. But when she reached the fence, her breath caught. Phoenix was gone. Emily's hands trembled as she scanned the dark fields with her flashlight. Phoenix, she called, her voice barely audible over the storm. Mark ran up beside her. We have to find him before he gets too far. They searched through the trees, their boots sinking into the wet ground. The rain made it hard to see, but Emily refused to give up. Then, she spotted hoof prints in the mud. This way, she shouted. Following the tracks, they reached a steep ravine. Emily's heart clenched as she saw a dark figure at the bottom. Phoenix. He was standing, but his legs were trembling. It looked like he had slipped down. Emily scrambled down the slope, mud sticking to her hands and clothes. I am here, Phoenix, she whispered. Phoenix let out a shaky breath, his body soaked and shivering. Mark threw down a rope. Can he make it up? Emily looked into Phoenix's eyes. We will do this together. Phoenix took a deep breath, then slowly began to climb. Emily held on to the rope as Phoenix pushed himself up. His hooves slid against the wet ground, but he did not stop. Come on, boy, Emily encouraged. You can do it. Mark pulled from above, giving Phoenix the support he needed. With one final push, Phoenix made it to the top. He collapsed onto the grass, panting heavily. Emily knelt beside him, tears mixing with the rain. You scared me, she whispered. Phoenix lifted his head and nuzzled her cheek. Mark smiled. That is one tough horse. Emily laughed through her tears. Yes, he is. They led Phoenix back to the barn, drying him off and making sure he was not hurt. That night, as the storm faded, Emily sat beside Phoenix, her hand resting on his mane. You are more than a fighter, she said softly. You are a miracle. Phoenix sighed, closing his eyes. He was home. After the storm, Phoenix recovered quickly. If anything, he seemed even stronger. He galloped across the fields with confidence, no longer afraid of the world. One morning, Mark leaned against the fence, watching Phoenix run. Do you ever think about what would have happened if we never found him? Emily shook her head. I cannot imagine that world. Phoenix had changed everything, not just for himself, but for Emily too. She had always believed in saving animals. But Phoenix had taught her something else. Sometimes, the animals saved you too? Mark smiled. So, what now? Emily grinned. Now, we keep moving forward. And as Phoenix ran across the open land, Emily knew his story was far from over. As time passed, something changed in Phoenix. He still stayed close to Emily, but often he stood by the open gate, looking toward the hills. Mark noticed it first. He is thinking about the wild. Emily swallowed. I know. One evening, she walked up to Phoenix and ran her fingers through his mane. Do you want to go back? Phoenix did not move away. But in his eyes, Emily saw the answer. Tears stung her eyes. I love you, she whispered. The next morning, she opened the gate. Phoenix stepped forward, looking out at the world beyond. Then he turned back. Emily held her breath. Phoenix nuzzled her one last time, then took off, racing toward the wild. Weeks passed, and the ranch felt different without Phoenix. But Emily knew he was where he belonged. One evening, as she stood outside, she heard a sound in the distance. A strong, familiar whinny. Her heart pounded as she looked toward the hills. And there, standing tall in the sunset, was Phoenix. Wild, free, but never forgotten. Tears filled Emily's eyes, but she smiled. Run, Phoenix, she whispered. Be who you were meant to be. Phoenix lifted his head, as if saying goodbye, then galloped away into the horizon. His story was not over. It had only just begun.